Welcome to our 10th episode of Show Me Sports Legacies. Tonight we're going to talk about the legacy of the Putnam County Lady Midgets softball team from the era of 1988 to 2007. And it's quite an era. And I'm going to bring in my co-host, Chris Ockenfels. And Chris, you're very familiar with this because I think you've gone up to Putnam County and taken a beating every now and then and fought through and maybe won one or two. Tough place to play.
It was, and it is. I've always said the toughest thing to do in high school sports is sustained excellence, being really good for a long time. A lot of schools can jump up with talent and win for a few years, but to be good for 15 or 20 years in a stretch is really difficult, and Putnam County was probably the epitome of that in North Missouri in the 90s and early 2000s because they were so good every year. And for starting a program like we did at Trenton right around the year 2000, it was a great model to look at and how we wanted to play, how we wanted to win because they were so good for such a long time.
We're going to bring in our guest, and our first guest is Max Mothersbaugh, who was the coach for Putnam County in the early part of that era and took them all the way up to 1997. And he built the program, which then carried on for another 10 years or so in that kind of dominant phase. Happy to have you, Max, with us tonight and looking forward to hearing some stories about that.
I'll try to be truthful.
Okay. It's not necessary. I mean, it's a podcast. Come on. Okay. So we've got Traci Hurley, who happens to be Max's daughter, also happens to be the first dominant pitcher during this Putnam County era, had an 81-9 career record, led to their first championship. Max, you got something to say about that?
Yeah, those 9 losses Traci had over 4 years, 5 of those were her freshman year. So she only lost 4 after that.
That's amazing. So Traci, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
And we're happy to have her. Dad-daughter things, I'm kind of into that. No, you are too, Chris.
Yeah, it's a fun relationship, especially to see that play out over a number of years. I got to experience Max coaching more from the North Central Missouri College aspect, but then to see him watch his granddaughters play at Trenton was a lot of fun. So a great legacy of fast pitch softball for sure.
Okay, let's just set the tone here. There were 12 trips to the Final Four during this era. And why are we talking about an era? Because they were just inducted in the Missouri Sports Hall of Fame, Putnam County Softball, for the era of 1988 to 2007. And 12 trips to the Final Four, 3 state championships, multiple third place, second place, just dominated. Hopefully we're going to hear some of those stories because I think the journey is always interesting, and Putnam County was willing to go anywhere and take on the big boys and girls to show their wares. So
we loved it.
Loved it. So finished during this era, those teams were 414-82. Pretty amazing. So I want to start with what you inherited, what you started with.
I'll give a lot of credit to Theresa Hunsaker. She coached Putnam before I got there, and softball wasn't her big love. So she was tickled to death when we moved into town. Those teams were disciplined, and they didn't have the pitching. And then when we came in, we had the pitching to go along with the athletes and so forth, and it just took off from there.
I remember when we were going to move to Putnam County because you were concerned about the numbers at North Shelby, that we wouldn't have enough athletes to have a team, because I was the only one in my class that played. And he was talking to me about it, and he said they have everything. They've got speed, and he really talked up the program because they had played them being in the same conference.
Well, I think it's impressive. And I come from that era when girls sports were just starting back up, I suppose. There'd been kind of a dormant period. Basketball teams were starting at Lawson and different things. Thank God, because girls sports is an amazing thing, and it adds so much to a school and to a community. And I think it was way underestimated back in the day when you guys were really coming into your own.
I would agree.
Yeah, completely.
Okay, so let's talk about these first teams. You said Traci's only losses, most of her losses occurred as a freshman player, but that freshman team went a long way. So talk about those first trips to the Final Four, how you built the team, what was a critical element to the team.
We were going to play what I call run and gun softball. We weren't going to go base to base and try to hit the ball over people. We were going to put it in play, and we were going to take every opportunity to get points. I had a very good umpire tell me one time after we had beaten Palmyra in the district championship, and after the game was over, he said, you guys score 2 runs a game, that other teams don't get. And I was trying to be modest, which is uncharacteristic. And I said, I don't know about that. And he said, Bull, you know that's true. And I thought about it for a second, and I thought, yeah, it is true.
Playing against Putnam County was always interesting on the other side because they always put pressure on the other team. They always put the ball in play. If they found a weakness, they were going to go at it. If you had a third baseman that couldn't cover the bunt, they were going to bunt 10 times in a row until you proved that you could cover that. If you had a catcher that couldn't throw down to second base, they were going to steal every time until they were really good at finding the weaknesses of the other teams and exploiting that. So you knew when you were going in, I have to be as solid as I can at all these little things, or they'll find them and make us look silly. And that's what they did to a lot of teams, is they just found those weaknesses, played a great style. You know, if you watch fast pitch softball, it's such an intimate game because everything is so close and you can watch the players right there. Everything happens within, 100 feet of the backstop, and Putnam County did a great job of making all that action happen. A lot of teams didn't fare well against them.
Some of our favorite pro teams, the Royals, when they won their world championship, had that same philosophy. We're going to steal bases. We're going to put the ball into play. We're not going to strike out.
I just remember spending so much time working on base running. And I wasn't really known for my speed. In fact, the girls laughed the other day because I saw something for the Hall of Fame and I had like 19 stolen bases or 11, maybe, I don't know, some silly number that the big old slow lady shouldn't have had. And they were like, I'm just impressed you had that many stolen bases. But everybody thought we were all fast because we were always getting a good read. We were always getting a good jump. But we spent the majority of our practice time, I would say, working on base running.
It's so important. And when you get the kids thinking 2 bases instead of 1, then it just plays off itself. And the next thing you know, we might be in a 0-0 tie with a good team in the 7th inning, and just all of a sudden they make one mistake. We really drilled our kid on certain things you're looking for. It's not just crazy running the bases at breakneck speed. You're looking for things, and then you trust your kids to execute. And over the years, I think that we did a pretty good job.
We knew our role as far as when we were at the plate. We knew what we were supposed to do to get that runner one base. And I think that's something that is kind of a lost art. I don't think people understand the out.
We'd make an out, move a runner, and you'd come in the dugout and everybody's high-fiving you, and you hit a weak ground ball on the infield, but you moved the runners. Mm-hmm. And that was a key thing for us.
I always like teams that play off their front foot. They're just... The minute that ball gets away from the catcher a little bit, they're on it.
But I will tell you, when we played Putnam County, we always had to be on your toes because there's always a situation in fast pitch softball where there's a runner on first. And if you put down a bunt, the third baseman will charge to field that bunt. And if they go to first, third base is left unoccupied. It's open. And if you didn't teach your left fielder, most of the time it was the left fielder. If you didn't teach your left fielder to come in, not only would they bunt that runner into second, but the good teams like Putnam County will take that extra base. And that's just one of the things we kind of learned as a young program watching these experience programs.
You got to the Final Four in every year that you played softball. Talk about those experiences, falling short. Did you feel like, hey, we did something, or did you feel like we left something on the table?
I think the first year it was just, we were happy to be there. I mean, we went down there and we got 4th. That was the only other ever 4th finish. And I don't remember, I remember being disappointed, but it was such an accomplishment. But every year after that, it was, we have to get there and we have to win. It was just a different mentality after that.
You got really close in that second year, second place.
We had it that second year. I look at that game kind of like Micah's senior year. Both of those games were there, but just didn't get it.
And a lot of times in those close games like that, it's the breaks that you get or don't get, because both teams are really good. Both teams have really good players. It's that one little break either goes your way or goes against you that can make the difference.
Right.
After that first year, it was just a mentality that we're going to take any base we can. We're going to make them make throws. If that throw is, if you're throwing in from the outfield, if that's a high throw that takes time to get received, then we were gone. It was fun softball.
That second year, you were 21-0 going into that last game and faced a pitcher that hadn't given up a run all year. Sometimes that happens.
I'd forgotten about that.
Casey Marshall of New Frankfort.
Oh, Casey Marshall, yes.
And she was one pick short of making the Olympic team. Jay Miller coached her at MU.
Wow.
You know who else was on that team? The country singer Sarah Evans.
Oh, yeah.
Really?
Did she sing the national anthem before the game?
No,
Oh,
she
well,
did not.
darn it.
And she was good.
Multi-tool
I
player.
remember her. By the way, her little sister was 75-6 in 4 years starting. And we went to the Final Four 3 times with her. So the 2 daughters, we were 7 out of 8 times we made it to the Final Four. That was cool stuff.
That's crazy good. Crazy good. So the payoff was in 1990. Talk about those games. Walk us through how you got to the Final Four that year and what those games were like in the Final Four.
We went down to Pattonsburg and froze our tail end off in the sectional. In those days, you played 4 teams met, and one came out of it and would go to the Final Four. And we pulled in there, and there was a drizzle rain going down. It was cold. The wind was blowing, and we played a team out of Jefferson, the Hall of Fame coach, Don Edwards. We just all of a sudden clicked. Everything clicked, and we ended up beating them in the championship 8-4. And we weren't supposed to win that game. So, and it just snowballed from there. One of the neat stories after that was when we were coming home on the bus after the tournament was over. When we got to Kirksville, cars were sitting there alongside the road on the way, all the way back to Putnam, up and down the road. And the train followed us into Unionville. And we set a tradition. We got a square and drove the bus around the square, and our kids were yelling and going on. And that became a part of the deal. When we go to Columbia, we want to drive around the square.
Excellent. What do you remember about that drive to get to the Final Four?
I mean, I just remember every game, it was a one-at-a-time thing. You had to really focus on that one-at-a-time thing because the ultimate goal was to make it back to the Final Four, and there was always the pressure to do that. But you had to really train your mind to really focus on the task at hand. And so that was always something that we did a lot of talking about. You always did a ton of scouting, and we had a scouting report, what every player did on the team and how to pitch to them. And so we really spent a lot of time focusing on that one team and not looking ahead down the road.
And scouting is not now like it was then when you actually had to scout. You actually had to send junior high or assistant coaches hundreds of miles, especially when you got deep into the postseason. Hey, can you drive to Fatima and scout this game for us? Or can you go to one, now with all of the technology, you can get scouting reports and game film, download it in 10 minutes and watch. But back then you had to actually go scout. And so the good teams would have you scouted, and they sent somebody, and usually it was either a trusted coach or the junior high coach that would go and say, "I'll go," and they would drive across the state to try to get a book on a team for you.
And that was stuff that Hunsaker did for us too. She always filmed all of our games.
Oh yeah, she helped us big time.
What kind of fan support? I mean, when you left town, did half the town follow you?
Lord, yes. And we would go to like district championship games, and we would have more people from Unionville than they had on their own field in big games. And we just had tremendous fans and great support in that regard.
We had years where we would have more fans at practice than other teams would have in the stands for the games. It was crazy.
I loved it. And you won a pair of 2-1 games. You beat Morrisville and you beat Fatima.
They were both good. Morrisville, we played in the championship. They had a pitcher, a really, really good pitcher, even though she was illegal. She crow hops. But
Spoken from a true coach.
It was just fun.
I had grown up playing against her too on the summer circuit,
Oh, yeah.
and I think your wife played with her, the Baumgartner girl.
Oh, what was her name?
Nikki.
Nikki Baumgartner? Yeah, she did.
We beat her 2-1 in that championship game, and it was a great game.
Wow. Tammy will be excited to hear that because Tammy played the traveling teams. And if you were from Trenton and played softball, there was no high school until 2000. So a lot of good players had to go somewhere to play, whether that was in Trenton for traveling teams or to Kansas City or even to Springfield. And all these girls knew each other because they played against each other, had like a little fraternity, if you will, of players that played softball. And then they would see each other in the summer and then in school ball. So it's kind of a neat thing about fast pitch softball.
I want to read you something you might get a kick out of. After you won the state championship that year, there was a letter to the editor sent to the Kansas City Star by Carol Fowler, Unionville, Missouri. Do you remember this?
I do.
It says, "We in Putnam County believe there should be at least a small mention in the Star about the 1A, 2A Girls State Softball Championships. All teams that participated worked very hard all season to get to the playoffs, and we think recognition is deserved for all teams that participated. We love our state champion Putnam County girls. That was pretty cool.
That's a classic example of everything we've talked about. It just, our fans were so into it, and we would have it like if we did any work on the field, it would go out there and roll up my shirt sleeves, and the next thing you know, I got 4 or 5 parents helping me out and doing what I need to have done. Great fans, great fans.
You had a perfect game that year.
She had an umpire come up to her after that perfect game at the state tournament and ask her for an autograph on the ball. So she autographed and gave it to the umpire. That was cool.
That is pretty cool.
We just kind of had the perfect storm, though. I mean, we had pitching, we had outstanding defense. I mean, we just didn't make mistakes. Base running, putting the ball in play, it was just kind of, I don't know, you knew your best 9 players were going to be on the field, and as a pitcher, it made it really easy to step out there because you knew there weren't going to be mistakes. And I always laugh because if a ball was back at me, especially a bunt, I just turned and winged it as hard as I could. I didn't worry about where I was throwing it because I knew it was going to get caught. Jonette made some of the most amazing acrobatic catches over first. Because, I mean, I never had to think about it. You just knew that play was going to be made. You knew that balls weren't going to fall in the outfield. It just, I don't know. We just had kind of the perfect storm there.
We had kind of a thing or I had kind of a thing where 2 runs maximum is what we're going to give up in ball games. We started giving up 3 runs or 4 runs. Coach started getting nervous. I mean, it was like unacceptable. We're back to 0. I'll back to my youngest daughter. Her 75 wins, 46 of them were shutouts. And Traci was basically in the same category.
It's nice to know that the person stepping out there on the bump is going to get the job done. In the hierarchy on a team, and you're building that team, you know, in pro ball, they always talk about up the middle, catchers, second base, shortstop, and center fielder. What is it in softball?
There's this white circle.
I knew this was coming.
And if the kid you put in that circle can step up to the plate and do well, then everything else flowed behind it. I see scores nowadays since they've made some changes and so forth, and you see 8-7, 10-9s, and those my hair, as wide as it is, would get wider if we were getting up that many runs. Our expectations were maximum of 2 that we'll give up, and we can cover that offensively. Some of our teams that went down there, our starting 5, we might have 3 or 4 kids that were pretty darn good offensively, and then we had role players and kids that came in there and knew their role and knew what was expected of them. On fortunate years, when we won the state championship that year, we were pretty good all the way around the field. But we had years where we had to manufacture runs, and I always thought we manufactured runs really well.
Talk about your scheduling philosophy. I mean, you didn't go to the Final Four, and that was the first time you'd faced great pitchers or great teams.
I was happy if we could play a great team every ball game. I can go 10-20 if I know that 10-20 is going to help us win and go on to the Final Four. That was a big thing.
You mentioned a tournament, Blue Springs, was it?
Oh, yeah.
Where you talked your way into a big tournament. Tell us that story.
We had lost the Columbia College tournament, which was a big-time tournament because of schedule changes and a thing our band had to go to. So I was hunting around for a tournament that would be really competitive and really push us. And I saw where Blue Springs out of Kansas City, and this was when the Blue Springs had 1 school, not 2. They had a tournament. And so I called up and I got the athletic director and told him who I was and what I wanted, and he was really blowing me off, little Putnam County. And I finally got aggravated, and I said, I'm not going to tell you we're going to win your tournament, but I will promise you we will be very competitive in your tournament. And he said, well, let me call you back. Let me talk to the athletic director, who was the softball coach, by the way. And a little while later, my phone rang in the coach's office, and it was him, only it was a different guy. All of a sudden, he was like, man, we're excited to have you. And he said, when I said Putnam County to my softball coach, he said, get them in the tournament. They're a great team, and they'll bring a great crowd. And it was really cool.
And I understand you pushed Blue Springs pretty hard.
2-1. They beat, and Blue Springs won the 4A state championship that year, by the way.
And your number one pitcher didn't pitch the championship game.
Our number 2 pitcher, because my youngest daughter was our number 1, and she threw 3 games, and she had to kind of be careful on her shoulder. So in the championship game, our JV pitcher pitched. Our all-state, 4-year all-state shortstop was sick and didn't play in that last game, so I moved my youngest daughter to shortstop. We darn near won that tournament. Years later, I'm down in Columbia with a friend. We're going to a tournament down there. We're eating at Wendy's, and the bus pulls in, Blue Springs bus. To make a long story short, I went to the coach and I introduced myself, and I said, you won't remember me probably. And he said, Putnam County. And I said, yeah. And he said, you know why I can remember everything about that game? And I said, no. And he goes, we beat Putnam County. And I thought that was pretty cool.
That is absolutely cool. Any other highlight on this journey, a game that stands out or a place that you played?
I think a lot of it was just kind of the friendships and the camaraderie that we had. We played travel ball in the summer, and we would go down and compete against really the best teams in the nation.
Yeah.
And at some of the very best tournaments, but we were all pretty much from Putnam County. Now, at that time, you had to have 2 non-roster players. So we had AJ May from Milan and Amber Steinbeck from Highland played for us. I mean, we spent the entire year together. Of course, we were all 3 sport athletes during the school year, and then we also played softball together. And so that was, we spent literally every waking moment together for 4 years. So that was kind of a cool thing.
We talk about that a lot, that the memories are in the journey. It's in the teammates. It's in those moments where things don't go well, but you pull it together and somehow you get through it.
Had Eddie Brundridge, who basically, he footed the bill for us to go play in all these tournaments because we were a bunch of poor farm girls that couldn't have done that otherwise. But Dad was his assistant, and we stayed in the best hotels and had the best meals and did all of it. It was quite an experience, and it really had a big effect on us come fall because we spent all summer learning each other and learning.
And our teams, every year through that stretch, our teams were almost always all or close to all Putnam County girls. So like Traci said on 2 kids, there were years when we had 1, and I think maybe a year or 2 when we had no out-of-town kids and would be able to go up and compete against the teams we played.
That's what's fun about those legacy eras that you have at small towns and small schools is it just kind of grows and it just kind of filters every year because the young girls, even like middle school and elementary, they see the big girls playing and wearing that uniform for Putnam County or whatever school that it is, and I'm going to be a player like that. And then they get into it, and then their families get into the support of the team in the town, and then they take over. Then the next crew of younger girls come in and they want to be like the older girls, and if you can keep that going, it's a lot of fun. Unfortunately, it can go against you too if you don't have that in your town. It's really hard to get that momentum going or get it back if you lose it.
Traci has her youngest daughter. Traci has the greatest picture. The girls are out playing or warming up before a game. It was in the national tournament, wasn't there? State tournament.
Oh, I think it was the
And
nationals.
her youngest daughter, who was quite a bit younger than the other 2, she was there by the fence, right up against the fence, just watching everything. And then later on, she got to be a pretty fair player herself.
A perfect example of that moment of the younger girl watching the older girls play. I know that picture too because I've seen Traci show that
It's
picture.
a neat picture.
You preach that so much to us, though, like all the little eyes that are watching you and make sure that you're making good decisions and that you are a role model to them. And so that was always in the back of our mind. Little kids would come up and ask for your autograph or want to talk to you or something. And as a high school kid, you don't think about that everything you're doing is being watched at all times. And so that was important, I think, for us to hear from you and Coach Halferty and Coach Hunsaker, to hear them tell us, like, hey, these kids are really looking up to you. And so it kind of made us make better decisions, I think, a lot of times.
I'm driving my pickup from Unionville back to Trenton. Something went wrong. It died, and then I got it off the side of the road, and I'm thinking, now what am I going to do? Well, here comes 2 cars down the road, and they pulled in. It was 2 women and a bunch of little kids, and they were from Kansas City. They were going back home. They decided to come spend a weekend at at a motel, and the kids swim, this, that, and the other. They gave me a ride to Trenton, and we start talking, and they found out I was a coach. And the mom goes, "Kids, this is a college coach. You want to get an autograph?" "Oh, yeah." And I thought, oh, wow.
I always loved it when I coached travel ball, and my group was a year behind your youngest daughter's group. And we had the same kind of philosophy. We didn't have an all-star team. We had a Trenton team. We were trying to build something that would help them. Every time I would talk about, we may be playing an all-star team today. You represent your town. And people would come up to me after watching us play, and they would say, "Coach, I love when our team plays you because we know we're going to have to fight to the very last buzzer." But they represent well, and they love each other, and they're great teammates. Those girls went on to have great high school careers.
And I think that group reminds me of the groups we had. When that group, like Micah's age and a year younger and a year older, they were friends. They liked each other. They wanted to represent each other and the school, and it was just a good bunch of people. That was fun to watch.
We were the first team that brought the run-up hitting from the left side.
Okay.
We had a fan that he was the neatest guy, he's passed away now, but we had won a big game down at the Final Four, and I had 3 run-up hitters in my lineup that year. And I meet him, and we stop, and we're talking, and again, he was the nicest guy, and he goes, "Coach, I know that helps you win. Gosh, I hate to see that kind of ball." I mean, you want to just roll back and rip it.
Slow pitch softball style.
Yeah, we weren't geared that way. We had a lot of nickel and dime hitters, and we just turned them to the left side. And that created quite a stir that year because coaches would challenge. Terry Morrow, an umpire, he started calling strike 3 on a fouled off ball. I didn't say anything then, but after the game was over, I said, "Terry, it's called run-up hitting. We're going to have you as an umpire in our district tournament. Would you please look that up and find out some information on it? We're legal on that. We're swinging." And he was a great guy. He called me that night, and he said, "Max, I owe you an apology." And said, "I won't make that mistake again." And that was pretty neat.
It just wasn't done at the high school level at that time.
No.
It wasn't. We had when we started the program about 2 years in, we had a pretty good athlete. Her name was Amber Van Devender. She was right-handed, but from watching a lot of the teams like Putnam County, I told her, "We've got to get you hitting from the left side. You're fast enough. If you hit from that left side, all you've got to do is get it past the pitcher. You're a 50-50 shot at worst to getting on first."
At worst.
At worst, if you just get it by the pitcher. And she became really good at the run-up hit and the drag bunt, and it was a simple sign to give as a coach because you knew if you scanned over, you've done this a million times, you scan over and find the weakness. Oh, look at that second baseman back on her heels, doesn't want anything to do with any of this game. You would just tell them, just hit it. Doesn't even matter if it's hard, just get it by the pitcher and you'll be on first, and that's a fun way to play.
I had a recruited kid out of Sedalia, Missouri, when I was at the college, and she was a right-hand hitter, and she probably didn't weigh 120 pounds. She didn't get on base much her freshman year, and I had messed with her like one practice on the run-up, and I pulled her aside, and I said, "I'm going to give you an opportunity to do the run-up hitting or just straight-up hit, but I'm going to tell you, if you do the straight-up hitting, you're probably not going to play much." And so she, "Okay, I'll run up."
Yeah.
And we were in a dugout in a game, and she had a great weekend, and she was on base all the time. And she'd come in there at one time, she goes, I just feel like I can put the ball anywhere I want."
Yeah.
That's a great feeling. You take this thing out 10 years, and it's not on the wane at all. I mean, you got third place finishes in your last 2 years at Putnam County. A new coach comes in as you move on to the college level, Mike Schmidli, and we had a chance to talk to him earlier today. We're happy to talk to Mike Schmidli, who was part of an era of Putnam County dominance, over 20 years of high school softball with 12 trips to the Final Four. Mike was the back half of that. He was there for a 10-year run of excellence and beyond. We welcome Mike Schmidli to the program.
Hey, thanks for having me.
When you stepped in, things were kind of rolling, and your very first year, you had some wild success. Was there kind of a Putnam County way to play softball?
Well, that's a good question, and I would answer that question with a yes. But to clarify, I was blessed to have had the opportunity to come into Putnam County in 1997, which was Max Mothersbaugh's last season. And so I got the opportunity to work under him for a year. I was actually coaching junior high, but I was getting to watch his practices and absorbing as much as I could from Coach Mothersbaugh, because his practices were unbelievably organized and they did all the right things, fundamentals and so forth. And plus that allowed me to get to know his kids I would be inheriting the next year. So it was a true blessing having that opportunity to work a year within the system prior to me taking the head coaching job. And the system was in place, and I felt like there was a little pressure that went with that because of all the success Max and his teams had prior to. But it was a great experience to walk into that kind of program and have the opportunity to continue what he had started.
You had success right off the bat. In 1998, you had a pretty dominant team, 24-4. That team was stocked up with great all-state level players. Nobody could stop you on your roll to the title.
Well, we did. We had several players. Now, there have been some key players that graduated from Max's last team, and his last team was as good a team as I probably could have remembered or seen at the high school level. But with that said, I had 6 returning players. Having visited with a couple of those players here more recently, they brought to my attention, that they expected that there would be some fall off in that transition from coaches. Being able to have those key players return from a system that had experienced so much success, they bought in. We lost a couple conference games early to good teams, very good teams, but we were able to learn from that. And as the season progressed, they become more confident. And when we went into the playoffs, just like all the teams that preceded them, they were playing at a high level and got to rolling. It was fun. I remember the state championship game against a very good Westran team, and Lacey Johnson was able to throw a no-hitter, and we got some timely hits. That was kind of a trend with those teams: good pitching, good defense, and timely hitting, aggressive base running. We just continued what Coach Mothersbaugh had started, and that team was a perfect example of that. Played some outstanding softball there late in the season, and we weren't in an easy district either. I think we were the 3 seed in our district. We were able to get on roll and win districts and kind of roll from there and get to that state championship game. And, what a wonderful experience.
I'm sure you just had a ton of support, but talk about how that presented itself to you.
Sure, absolutely. When you have success, you draw interest, and because of all the winning and the Final Fours and district titles that had preceded my time there. By the time I started, we would go on the road, regular season games, and we'd have larger crowds than what our opponents had. And home crowds, we had a lot of people that followed us that didn't even have kids or grandkids playing. There was just a lot of interest at that time. That community support meant a lot. We got a lot of financial support when we needed stuff, equipment, learning tools and whatnot. They were wonderful supporters of Putnam County Softball. And that's a part of the program that has continued even up through today. And I know it was a great benefit to the kids. It was absolutely a great experience.
In your 2003 run, it seems like in the semifinals and the finals, the other teams kind of self-destructed. Your pressure on them, good pitching.
That 2003 team, we lost our pitcher who had suffered a knee injury during the summer, but we had taken some time off hoping that she would recover. And then she started the season, and we were actually playing at the North Central Missouri College tournament there in Trenton. She went to field a bunt and her knee gave, and she went down, and we had to sit her down for a while. And so I think she missed 3 weeks, basically the remainder of the season. We had to bring in our number 2 pitcher to finish that season. That kind of played a part in us losing some games there late. But I tell people now, looking back, our number 2 pitcher wasn't a power pitcher. She pitched to contact. I thought defensively that made us better because we had to make plays to be successful. We brought Jackie Lockheed, who was our pitcher. We brought her back the game before we started district. She pitched against Clark County. She didn't pitch well. They hit her pretty hard. She comes back in districts, pitches 3 1-0 games. We win all 3 of our district games 1-0. Again, we went in as a 3 seed. Then we give up a run in the sectional game, and that was partly my fault because my defensive philosophy was if they had a runner at first and they bunted, whoever didn't field the bunt, my third baseman, my pitcher, had to rotate back to third. Having forgotten or not thinking about the fact that she was still battling a knee injury and not moving as well as she needed to, I hadn't adjusted that. And so in the very first inning, they bunted with a runner at first. She went first to third because we didn't get there and scored on a ground ball. and that was their one run. But I think we ended up scoring 9-1. I only suggest that because then in the next round, we're playing the quarterfinal game and playing Centralia, a very good team, who happened to be in the same conference as Mark Twain. And I know those two coaches had talked about Putnam being susceptible to giving a runner third base on a bunt. But we had gone home after that sectional game and changed our theory on that. Decided to have our shortstop rotate over and concede second, cover third. And in a 0-0 game, with Centralia being a home team, bottom of the seventh, they get their leadoff runner on, which would have been the winning run. And they bunted and tried to go first to third, and we executed the throw to first and a first to third throw to turn a double play. Went on to win that game in 9 innings, 1-0, which got us to the Final Four. And then our 2 games down there were like 4-0 and 3-0. So we had been extremely battle tested in 4 of the 5 games that we played in the districts and in the state playoffs before we even got to the Final Four. And I think that test really had prepared us for what we saw at the Final Four. And again, we saw 2 outstanding teams, but we were playing with a lot of confidence by then. And that team we didn't hit the ball very well, but we tended to take advantage of anything teams give us. And I think that was kind of, a big part of that. And Jackie's pitching, like I said, she threw 6 shutouts in 7 games after having sit out for 3 weeks because of a knee injury, and she still wasn't 100%. As a matter of fact, after the season, she went in, got that knee checked out again, found out she had a torn ACL and had to have surgery, within a week after she led us to a state championship. So that's one of my favorite stories, but that was a special team, and they really stepped up when they had to.
I have to give you congratulations, even though you did beat my alma mater in that final game. I went to Lawson High School.
Did you?
And they've had some good teams, as you know. Last thing I'm going to ask, what was the highlight of that ceremony, Columbia, for the Hall of Fame?
Yes, it was absolutely a lifetime experience. I didn't realize when they announced that they had selected the Putnam County Softball era, the extent of how big a deal it really was. They invest a lot of time in making that experience extremely special for the kids, especially the players of that era and the coaches. And, and I encourage as many players as we could to attend that thing. And I'm really glad we did. The ones that did attend or were able to attend, I know it'll be one of the things they cherish for a lifetime. And even the former players that weren't able to attend, the fact that they could go back and watch it on video and still be a part of it. It's one of those things that, you just looking back, you just didn't realize how big a deal it was. The Missouri Sports Hall of Fame certainly lived up to that and made that experience extremely memorable for everybody involved. And I can't thank them enough. And I can't thank my former players enough. It was special. The kids invest a lot of time during that. That was part of the reason for success. And I know I have the pleasure of working with one of my former players from that time period. And we still talk about it. The fact that looking back, she was a pitcher, and actually Stacy Hines pitched at NCMC for Max there too. And, we talk about how much time we spent practicing pitching and whatnot. She tells kids today, it's worth it. It's just worth the amount of time you invest if you really want to be good. And I think that's a good testimony to a lot of the kids that played in the Putnam County program.
Mike, thank you. Appreciate your time and love hearing the story.
All right. Hey, thank you. We really appreciate it.
Okay, we want to thank Coach Mike Schmidli. We're going to lead off of that. Max, you've got a story to tell us.
We were playing the district at Princeton. The game was on the radio. We beat the team. We played pretty badly. And after the game was over, the guy that did the game on the radio came up and was visiting. And he said, "You know where people make their mistakes playing you guys?" And I said, "Where?" And he said, "If I were coaching against you guys in a big game," he said, "I would not allow my players to watch you take infield, outfield pregame." And he said, "You intimidate them. You don't make any mistakes." And there's a hidden secret in that. Coach was pretty charitable on the ground balls he hit before a game and the fly balls. Everything was ultra routine. We did our working on the hard stuff in practice. But I wanted that other team who you knew were going to be watching you taking warm-ups, I wanted them to see us flawless. And our kids pretty much answered the bell on that.
I always remember being in layup lines and play these really big teams. And you look down there and they're stuffing the ball or doing stuff like that you couldn't hope to do. And it's just, the game was kind of over before it started sometimes. You got anything to say about that?
Well, I think that's something that has stuck with me, and I can't watch another team take infield before a game without cringing, because there'll be a kid that'll get 5 or 6 or 7 balls hit to them, and they're every time they're making an error, and every time the coach is hitting it a little harder and a little harder, and I think, stop, coach, stop.
Yeah.
So it's
back it up and hit the easy ones.
Yeah.
Our ground ball, working on ground balls, we start off with an imaginary ball, and we had lines, and you would charge, field, and pretend to throw. And when I was satisfied that we were working on our footwork, and when I was satisfied with that, then we would lay a ball in the dirt. And they had to come in and feel that ball in the dirt and throw and then interchange lines. And then we would go all the way up to roll, not bounce, roll the ball to them. And when I was satisfied with that, then we'd start for real hit. And I wanted to get as much fundamentals as we could on that before we actually got into the game part of the season.
That's interesting and obviously very effective.
Well, my coach, when we were in high school, had the same thing, but we called it phantom infield outfield, where we would do an entire infield outfield routine with no ball. And he would play it like he was, trying to win an Academy Award. He was up there and he would, just like he's going to hit a ground ball, and we would field and throw to first. And, when you do phantom, everything's perfect, right? So you making plays, and outfielders are making great catches and firing the ball in. There's no ball. And when I first did that with my girls at Trenton, they thought I was crazy. It was the dumbest drill they've ever done. By the end of that first year, they wanted to do that.
It pays off.
As many times as we could. They loved phantom infield outfield because they could be stars and they knew everywhere to go and everywhere to play. In the back of my mind, I'm thinking, we've got them. Now they want to be perfect, and we'll add the ball later. Just get them introduced to that.
Excellent drill.
Okay, so here we are 30, 40 years later, and the Missouri Sports Hall of Fame calls, and you find out that the Putnam County girls softball program era is being put in the Hall of Fame. How did you find that out, and what were your thoughts?
Gosh, how did I find it out? It was shocking, I would say.
I think Calvin Heidenwiff called you.
Calvin did, that's right.
The athletic director at Putnam.
And let me know, and it was like, wow. And then my immediate thoughts are, boy, there's a lot of girls softball players, next softball players, who probably have bad backs from carrying coach. My best coaching was get out of their way and let them play.
Once you taught them the basics.
So once the prep work was done. In the game, it was get out of the way.
Yeah.
But
and you encouraged that aggressiveness that won you those games. So they weren't afraid to make a mistake.
And I hope we did it. I know we did a good job of, this is something that if you do it and do it right, correctly, and you do it enough, then all of a sudden you jump levels. You're this level of player, and now all of a sudden they're this level. By the way, on that radio guy that was talking about not letting us, not watching us, that next fall we played St. Pius out of Kansas City at Princeton in the district championship, and I'm hitting infield, outfield pregame, and I glance over, and they're in the third base dugout. They're outside the dugout with their backs to the field, and the coach is facing the field talking to them. And I looked at that, and I thought, that's odd. And I watched again and again, and the whole time he's talking to them. When the last ball came in, they broke and came into the dugout. But he had been warned by the
Talk about the event that Missouri Sports Hall of Fame put on. Were you signing autographs? Did you have a lot of players there? Were there other celebrities that were there that you thought, wow, I'm in the same room getting
I got
honored?
to shake hands with Norm Stewart and visit with him for about 20 minutes.
Chase Daniel was inducted.
Chase Daniel, Gary Pinkel, the football coach, I got to visit with him.
Ben Askren, the wrestler, was inducted at the same time.
ESPN guy, Anderson.
John Anderson.
So those were neat. But you and Norm Stewart got to share some Shelbyville stories, because you coached at North Shelby, and Norm is from Shelbyville, and was good friends with Kelly Ray's dad.
I'll call him a hero. What a great basketball coach he was.
Been nobody like Norm.
Nobody like Norm, and won't be.
So what was the feeling with your players all around you getting that award? Because I'm sure there were a lot of players that you hadn't seen.
Well, recently. Old dummy me tried to talk, broke down twice, I think. We were given 3 minutes, and I kind of finally got myself composed there at the mic. I turned around to the guy in charge, and I said, this is going to cost me my 3 minutes. And it was so much about the kids. And our turnout that day, we had a boatload of Putnam County people down there for that. And that wasn't any cheap thing. You got charged for it. And saw players that I hadn't seen in years, and it was really cool.
And Putnam County did kind of a neat deal too during their homecoming. They brought everybody out, and so there were a lot that came back to that. They named the complex after Mike Schmidli and the fields after Dad, and so that was really neat. We had tons and tons of players at that we got to see. Some that I had not seen probably since graduation.
And remember, did you see the outfield picture where we're standing out by the scoreboard? I mean, there was just a huge. I was worried that. It's been so many years since I'd coached some of these kids that our crowd group wouldn't show up. There'd be a lot of them that didn't. I called Jonette Dixon, Tracy's best friend in college and our best player. She was a stud. And asked her to, because she's a very good communicator, asked her to, at the assembly to speak. I talked to her. She lives in Denver, and I was talking to her on the phone. And I said, I'm worried about whether we have how many show up. And she go, "Oh, I begged to differ, Coach. There'll be a crowd."
Challenge is on Putnam County listeners to listen to the podcast, because we know you've turned out for all these events for your softball.
Absolutely. We got to figure out ways to get that out. I just want to thank you for coming in and telling this story. It really resonates with me. I think it's a fantastic story. Once again, I think a lot of times women's sports in general get second tiered for no good reason. And this has been right there at the top. And I know there were good football teams going on while you were winning those championships, and people love that too. But you guys rallied that whole town and just created a legacy. It's fun to talk about.
Well, I'd like to double up on my feelings on Mike Schmidli, a tremendous coach who I didn't bat an eye when I turned the program over to him. I knew it was going to get, if anything, better. And he's done a great job over there and where he's at now and continues to.
It's like you say, it's all about the players and putting them in the right positions and teaching them the fundamentals and then letting them play the game and have fun.
Stay out of the way.
You had a lot of fun, didn't you?
We had a lot of fun. That was always your speech at the beginning of the year. We were going to have a lot of fun, but we were going to put in the time to work because winning's a lot more fun.
It is.
Our practices, our first practice that we would have, I'd have the kids in the bleachers, and I would go over different things, our schedule, and then I would turn around to my assistant coach and I'd say, "Coach, do you have anything?" And he would or wouldn't, and if he did, he'd voice it. And then I'd say, "Okay, seniors," and we'd bring the seniors out of the bleachers, and when they got down to the ground, I said, "Let me know when you're done." And we had a coach's office in the concession building, and my assistant and I would go in there and wait for them to get done. When they got done, they would tap on the door. "We're ready for practice." I would tell the kids, "You are my assistant to the assistant coaches. Any issues, anything goes on, I'm coming to you first." And I never got burned on that. I always said, I would hear back later about, the kids really bought in and so forth, so on. I thought that was an important thing we did.
Well, I'm just going to leave it with the idea that I think Norm Stewart probably learned a couple things in that 20-minute chat with you. And that's why you had a 20-minute chat, because he coaches no coaches.
Yeah, he's a neat guy.
Chris, you got anything you want to say?
Well, I have two quick Max stories, if I'm allowed to.
They won't be true.
Yeah, they're absolutely true. So the first one is in 2003, the year that Putnam County won that state championship. Early in the season, Trenton went up to Putnam County and won for the first time ever on that field. And we came back to town and we were practicing the next day. And Coach Max and I used to practice at the same times or be coming off the field while one's going on, the college and the high school. And he made a point when I was a young coach to come over to me and say, "That was a big win last night. I'm not sure I could remember more than a handful of teams that ever won on that field, non-conference."
Didn't happen very often.
Didn't happen very often. And I just felt really good about that moment. So thank you for that. But the second one's a little funnier. So I'm getting ready to stop coaching and become the AD at Trenton. And Max comes up to me and says, "You better hold on for a couple of years because there's this little Utley girl that's in middle school and she's going to be pretty good." And I thought, "Oh, whatever." I said, "No, I think I'm gonna be the athletic director." He's like, "Okay, but I'm telling you, she's going to be pretty good." Ends up, becomes the pitcher in high school to take Trenton to their first Final Four. So
All-American 3 years at Central Methodist.
yeah, great high school pitcher and college pitcher.
Oh, Lord, yes.
And that's something. It's crazy how he could spot a kid and spot the talent that other people didn't see. I remember with Aubrey, you were always just raving about her. And we went down to Independence, and you were so excited because she was going to be down there, and you wanted me to go watch your picture. And I stepped there and I was like, that's the kid you've been talking about? And he said, you just watch. Mm-hmm. And she did. She was really, really good.
Well, thank you again. We want to put our congratulations in from the podcast to Putnam County Softball era, 1988 to 2007, members of the Missouri Sports Hall of Fame. Thank you for listening to Show Me Sports Legacies.